Machine learning is all about, like right now, currently, it's all about predicting the next word in a sentence. That's all the large language models, but
Yeah.
there's deeper work to be done. It's not getting all the attention. Being able to contribute open source is already a privilege. If you're experts in any of these domains, you could inject machine learning into it and get some insight that you didn't have before.
In today's episode, we have Thomas, who is a senior machine learning engineer at Union.ai. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, Felix. Thanks for having me.
So you have an interesting career path towards getting into a role today. Twists and turns. You went from a physics PhD candidate to even starting your own tutoring business and then ultimately finding your way to machine learning. Tell us more about what your life was like before becoming a machine learning engineer and what motivated you to become one.
Before I was a machine learning engineer, I was a software engineer. What motivated me to become a machine learning engineer? Well, most of the libraries I worked with while as being a software engineer, I was working with machine learning and in the Python data space. So I was always in machine learning. The way I got into software engineering in the first place was through my open source contributions. That's how I got my software development skills in the first place.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about the path you took with work in open source contributions to get into the career in a second. I want to hear more about this transition from being a software engineer into becoming a machine learning engineer. For anyone out there that's interested in machine learning and are just a, let's say, generalist or maybe like a back end software engineer, what kind of steps or I guess intermediate steps you have to take along the way to land a role or to look as an attractive candidate for a machine learning engineer role?
When I'm looking for another machine learning engineer at Union or before, when I'm the interviewer, machine learning engineer is a very big scoped title where you have to understand the data science point of view of machine learning and also the engineering piece because it's your responsibility to put things into production. So you don't have to be up on the latest research as a data scientist does, but essentially you're a software engineer with a good understanding of data. And the way you get here is everyone has a different path. Like my path was I'm a physicist, I trained physicist, so most of my experience is very mathematical and technical. So I can pull the theoretical parts of data science very easily. I could learn those pieces easily. And so if you already have software engineering, the easiest way that I see my peers get to machine learning engineering is usually data engineering first, because that's when you get a chance, an opportunity to learn from folks at your company that are data scientists and more data involved and learn about data science itself while being a software engineer. And your a data engineer is very useful like in a team like that.
Yeah, I like that. So I guess what's missing from if someone is a data engineer, they want to take this path that you identified, which is to go get kind of more hands-on experience and more adjacent to data engineering. They become a data engineer. What's the next kind of leap they need to take to become a machine learning engineer? Like what's different? What's missing from a data engineer, I guess, let's say job description that's inside machine learning engineer's job description?
So a data engineer cares about the ingestion of data. Machine learning engineer also cares about this, but they care about everything that comes after the ingestion of data. Like you have data, you want to get some insights from it. You may want to create a model. You may want to do some sort of analysis, and you will want to productionize this. You want to repeat this over and over again, and that's starting to become into the machine learning engineer realm, where you're thinking about how to productionize insights about your data. And you normally work with data scientists that think about how to run these experiments, and it's your job to make it productionizable.
Yeah. So one thing that you advise as well is to connect machine learning to your existing domain expertise while you're transitioning into this field. Can you elaborate more on why having this connection with your domain expertise is so valuable?
I feel it's very meta to like using what you already know and where you're at now and leveraging your strengths in the current moment in time to get to where you want to be in the future.
That makes sense. So I know we'll talk about you mentioned earlier about how you broke into software engineering through your open source contributions. For anyone out there that might not be familiar with the open source space, like what does open source mean? How does someone even contribute to open source projects? Tell us more about open source in general.
The way I see it is there are different communities of people that work on code together in public. And people come into open source for many reasons, but most people stay because of the people involved in the projects. So you're developing code together in a group, and you have an open source community, and you're working on a specific topic domain together. And everyone's in there for different reasons, but it's very empowering because open source code powers a lot of the things we work on today and the systems we have running now.
Yeah. So how did it work out for you where getting involved in open source was so powerful for your career transitions? Like, why do you recommend it to other people?
Being able to contribute to open source is already a privilege because you're using time to volunteer your time to work on something publicly. For a certain group of people that can have this time to put into open source, I think it's a good path. The reason why I think it's good, if you have the time, is you get to interact with engineers that are more experienced than you. And like, they give you feedback about what you do. It's a very quick learning experience once you're in that loop of working on things and having people come and give you feedback. And the open source projects are maintained well, will push you to also want to review other people's code. So you also get that part of the experience as well, being an open source contributor.
I think you touched on something that's really important that I didn't consider, which was that the feedback cycles are such a huge advantage to work with other people that working on a solo project to learn how to code, for example, or to learn a new language or to learn a new framework, all of that. It has its time and its place, but the feedback cycles are either super long or maybe not even non-existent because you're not getting the feedback from other individuals. And I think one thing you mentioned was that big benefit of open source in working in these communities is that you get to work with a lot of experts and people that understand the projects that they're working on. We can also be really intimidating, right? Because now you are contributing to a project that a lot of experts have touched, or people that have maybe created the project or the repo or reviewing code. Is it as simple as like, can you just start opening a pull request, for example, to an open source project? How do you actually get involved once you've identified a project that you want to work on?
So this is my procedure. So I usually look at the issues and see if there are good first issues or documentation issues because I want to play with the project. I want to know how to develop it. And then usually a good first issue or documentation issue allows you to clone it, figure out how they set up the development environments. And from there, I open a pull request to that. So I'm talking about GitHub now, open a pull request and see how they respond to it. Some communities take a longer time, some communities are quick. Depending on that interaction, I either decide to double down and like this is something I want to be part of, or I go to another project. So it's like I decide on a project based on if I'm interested in the project and how the community interacts with new contributors. And the more welcoming they are, the more I would stay.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think you've identified that not all open source communities are equal. Are there any specific machine learning projects or communities that you recommend people check out that you find that are very welcoming, especially to beginners, and that can help people get motivated to contributing to open source projects?
So for machine learning, there's the one I maintain, which is scikit-learn. We're very welcoming. Most of the Pi data stack, like NumPy and SciPy, are very welcoming too. They have the meetings where newcomers could come and ask questions directly to the maintainers. Not only do you have access in text form, you also can join meetings to chat with people. There's at my job, I work on open source flights, and there's also monthly meetings there. Then people come and contribute to that type of project. PyTorch is also fun if you like machine learning and neural networks.
Yeah, so tell us more about, so now that let's say that someone has open source contributions on their portfolio, on their resume, how do you actually leverage open source contributions to in the job search process? Is it helping you land interviews? Is it coming up in interviews? And when is it actually helping out in the job search?
There's many angles to this. For me, I have proposed talks depending on different open source projects I've been involved in during that time. And that has basically broadened my network so that I could connect with more people. So that's one angle where you work on open source. If you think it's something impactful, you could present it in many venues and people know who you are and what you've done. And it's that type of network. The second angle is during an interview, a lot of the time they talk about projects. Open source pull requests can be a vehicle to talk about a project. Like you've worked with other people. If the more involved ones where you have design decisions and like there's a back and forth, those make for very good stories for when an interview asks you for a project story. Like this is a very common thing to ask when you go on an interview, like about past projects that you worked on or
Right.
what the conflicts that you went through. And for the more complex pull requests, you will run into a conflict somewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I think as someone that has also interviewed and hired people, I think it's important to recognize that again, if you create a bunch of projects on your own and you have a big portfolio of projects you create on your own, it can obviously show like maybe your technical depth and breadth. But I think having to work with people is such a big part of having to be part of like an engineering team that if you can show that either through obviously like an internship or past job experience is the most valuable. But then open source projects and you work with other people, I think just touches or demonstrates a skill set that you just can't replicate by having like your own solo projects. So I want to talk a bit about you mentioned your public speaking, which I think is awesome. Public speaking and giving tech talks that you said has expanded your networks. If you're up on stage or you have a video out there of you presenting, and obviously carries a lot of weight. So there's authority there that you know what you're talking about, and obviously that's helpful to land interviews. Tell us more about maybe your first times giving these talks, especially for anyone that is scared or worried about public speaking and are uneasy about it, but they want to do what they can to broaden their network. How did you or when did you feel you're ready to present and give a talk?
For me, I've always liked presenting. I performed when I was in high school. I was always the one on the whiteboard to present topics to people. So for me, once I found something that was worth presenting, I submitted a proposal to my local Pi Data in New York City, and then this was in the beginning before I was a software engineer. I submitted a talk to talk about Scorch, which is a neural network machine learning library, and talking about that at Pi Data in DC. So that's how I got into it. But for people that are not inclined to speak publicly like this, there's a lot. Most of the metropolitan cities, there's meetups where people organize lightning talks, where you talk for 5 minutes about any topic, low pressure, and then you get feedback and you get used to talking publicly. And I've seen this help people. I try to nudge people to give lightning talks. And then after that 5 minutes, and they do it a few more times, they get into the habit of learning to speak publicly. And then they could submit proposals to conferences to talk about something they are interested in.
Yeah, and I also think that preparing to give a talk, I think, just really requires you to give really kind of hand wavy explanations that you have for things and kind of requires you to see the gaps in your knowledge that would just show up because you would now have to teach someone else about it. So, speaking of applying for talks, what do these conference organizers or even like meetup organizers, what do they care about in terms of a proposal? What should you focus on to create a proposal that a conference organizer is going to choose to allow you to give a talk at their conference?
So conferences have different heuristics for this, but there are some things that are the same. Normally, when you're at a conference, there's a committee of people that selects the talks. I've been part of the Pi Day New York City one, and usually these are the three criteria: interesting, new, and then we prefer people that are first time speakers. If we're weighing between two options, we prefer the new person.
That's awesome. That's very welcoming of you to prefer to give the stage to newcomers. What about the preparation process? So once you have submitted a proposal, gets accepted, tell us more about like what you recommend or what is your preparation process for giving a talk.
Everyone has a different one. I like speaking through my whole talk before I make any slides. I walk around my neighborhood and just talking about the topic and visualizing what I want people to see. But by the end of it, I have the talk all figured out verbally. And then from there, I make the slides. In this format, my voice is the primary source information, and the slides are supposed to help aid. This is my style of speaking. I think this works well. Like, I don't want to depend, like, don't depend on the slides. Have it all in internal. Have this talk already in you.
I like that, so that the slides are not like a crutch for the talk and instead it should supplement the verbal content that you're delivering. So you mentioned open source projects and giving talks to land and to also help out the interview process. But another thing that you mentioned to us was that one of the most useful things that you've done for transitioning careers is to review your resume and then help reframe the experience for tech roles. So I'm assuming this means that maybe a role isn't like a very tech specific role you had in the past, but reframe it. Can you walk us through this like resume reframing process that you referred to?
Depending on when you want to apply, your resume has to be tailored to the job. You might want to highlight things that are more specific to that job. For a concrete example, let's say you're a machine learning engineer that wants to apply for a data scientist, or a software engineer that wants to be a machine learning engineer. You could talk about your Kubernetes skill. You could talk about your software engineering skills, but you want to highlight the project you've done that are data science in general because you're doing a machine learning engineer job. So it's a lot about framing. It's like you have to highlight the things that are more applicable to that job.
So once let's say you get your resume ready, you either done the work, the machine learning work to become an attractive candidate, or you did open source projects, you're giving talks, all these great paths to getting to becoming a candidate for a machine learning role. What is the actual interview process like? Like for your experience when you were applying, or your experience when you're interviewing, what is the interview process?
Fairly similar to a software engineering process. The big difference is that we'll have instead of a systems design interview, you'll have a machine learning systems design interview. So, because you're a machine learning engineer. And so, in that interview, in the machine learning system design, you have a given scenario where you have to incorporate data, a model, and design a system around that scenario. And so, it's a system design interview with data mixed in. But the rest, like having algorithm experience, having the behavior interview, they're all the same except for this one tweak to machine learning.
That makes sense. So let's say you land a job, but now obviously you still have to continue to learn to grow your skill set. What are some exciting developments or opportunities in the machine learning domain, in this space that make you the most eager and excited about the future from a career perspective? Like that you think that if someone breaks into his career, they might want to invest time in this particular area of machine learning.
I think the most interesting pieces of machine learning are attached domains that I'm not expert in. So, machine learning and data science and AI is all about getting value from data, but data is very abstract. It's like legal data, bio data, there's political policy and data. So, if you're experts in any of these domains, you could inject machine learning into it and get some insight that you didn't have before. These are the things that I think are very exciting. Like people that are not data experts, giving the tools for them to extract insights from the data is very interesting to me.
It sounds like you would think that then there's a lot of kind of low hanging fruits for a lot of domains that are just missing the application of machine learning to revolutionize the domain.
Yes.
That's awesome to hear. Well, what and I'll leave you this last question then. What is something that maybe you have a contrarian perspective about breaking into the machine learning career, or just in general about machine learning?
I think we need to think more about causality when we do machine learning. Like for right now, machine learning is all about like right now currently, it's all about predicting the next word in a sentence. That's all the large language models, but
Yeah,
there's deeper work to be done about causality and figuring out ways to link events together. I think it's important, but not hyped up. A simple example is if you see someone walking with an umbrella and then you see someone with a raincoat outside. This is a very common thing that happens outside. If you just apply machine learning to that, you may say, "Oh, the person holding umbrella causes this person to have a raincoat too.
Ah, I see.
But that's not the case. There's a dirt factor. It rained. And so getting these insights from data is possible. It's harder, but it's doable. And I want there to be more effort into advancing this field.
What does that mean? Does that mean that the data isn't there, or there's like the people that are creating the model? Is it like a creativity thing that they haven't considered that there's this third option? And I guess in your example, like what is missing that's causing that people are, I guess, blind to the true causality?
It's a hard problem. That's like if you didn't if I didn't if an alien came here, didn't know about the weather, they won't guess the rain. There's data we have that has this quality too. Like you have two things that look like they're related, but we don't know this third thing that caused them. And there are techniques that try to figure this out. It's still being developed, but it's not getting all the attention.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's like the kind of pro and con of such kind of AI and large language models being such a household name that it brings a lot of attention, a lot of investment, a lot of interest in the space. But then also, in your example, a lot of the more important things are kind of lost in a lot of the hype and the marketing behind what's popular today. So, thank you so much for coming on here, Thomas, and sharing your journey, your advice, and your experience with us.
Thank you for having me.